Welcome to the second half and our talk this morning on karma and its consequences. I've just put a little message in the chat box, which is a link that you might like to follow up after the class. So I'm going to be looking at karma and its consequences from two different angles this morning. So I'm going to be using Vishvapani's little piece on the four reflections, the four mind-turning reflections. I'm not sure whether the previous weeks the speakers have used that, but they may well have done. And it's a very good, I think it's a very good version of these reflections. So I'm going to start by reading out Vishvapani's reflection on karma. And then I'm going to turn to looking at it from a more traditional viewpoint by referring back to, if you like, back to source material. And then I'll conclude by just reading Vishvapani's piece again, because I think it's well worth it. And the link that you have will take you to the piece that includes all of Vishvapani's reflections. So this is what Vishvapani has to, or his version of the reflection on karma. Everywhere I look in the universe, I see things arising and passing away in dependence upon conditions. From galaxies and stars to microorganisms, this pattern holds true. Things aren't random, they have causes and effects. This is also true of my life. What I am today is the product of many influences: my family, culture, education, and relationships. It's also the product of choices I've made, of how I've acted, of my mental states and habits. There are many things I cannot alter, and these I must accept. But I can change those conditions that spring from my mind. I can change how I think. I can affect how I feel. Meditation and Dharma practice give me ways to do so. I know that skillful actions have brought me happiness and fulfillment and have benefited others. When I've been kind or generous, I've seen others benefit, and it has given me happiness. I know that my unskillful actions have harmed others and harmed me too. When I've been unkind, I have seen the pain I have caused. Those actions have reinforced negative states of mind that make me unhappy, and I've felt remorse and regret. Therefore, I should cultivate positive states, practice skillful actions, and avoid unskillful ones. This means practicing the Dharma, which offers a sure path to establishing positive conditions. To this path, I commit myself. So there we have the third reflection on karma in very modern form, very current language. I'd now like to just turn back to really the source material, the teachings of the Buddha that underlie that piece by Vishvapani, and that in a way, what they do, they shape our thinking on karma and its consequences and how we put that into practice. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and this will be familiar ground to you, but hopefully you'll forgive me for going over some old stuff. But of course, karma doesn't exist on its own. It's not just out there as a thing, as it were, separate to everything else. Karma has its roots in conditionality, as the Buddha saw at the time of his enlightenment. is a basic understanding of the conditioned nature of all things. And that conditionality is expressed perhaps in its most well-known form in this little verse, which we'll see on our first slide, please, Ed. So again, you'll be very familiar with this verse, I'm sure. This being that becomes, from the arising of this, that arises. This not being that does not become, from the ceasing of this, that ceases. A very succinct statement of conditionality. Because we can expand that out a bit, and as we have done on our mornings when we looked at conditionality. If we go on to the next slide, please. And so we have these 5 niyamas, the 5 areas, if you like, in which conditionality works. And this particular formation, of course, put together by Bhante himself, based on the traditional teachings, but again, perhaps bringing it into more up-to-date language. So we have these 5 levels of conditionality, and I'm not going to go through all 5 of them. You're familiar with them, I'm sure, from previous classes. But of course, the one we're particularly interested in this morning is the 4th level of conditionality, which is what we might like to call karmic processes, that things arising and passing away in dependence upon those conditions that we have some responsibility for bringing about, which is probably how we could describe the karmic level of conditionality working. This is the area where our actions have consequences, where we set up conditions that bring about certain consequences. Okay, thank you, Ed. You can take that down. So the Buddha had quite a lot to say about karma, but in particular, the Buddha in one of the sutras addressed some of the views that were current in his time around karma, and I think these are still relevant today, because things haven't changed that much. Certainly human nature hasn't really changed in the interval since the Buddha was teaching. But the Buddha addressed certain wrong views around karma that he could see, and gave the Buddhist perspective on them. And there are principally, we have 4, which I'd like us to look at now. So yeah, if we could have the next slide, Ed, please. So the Buddha taught that, firstly, there is a difference between skillful and unskillful actions. So it does matter what we do. It is important. It's not something we can just dismiss as it being irrelevant, or, oh, well, it's, it's just minor, or it doesn't affect anyone. It doesn't make any change. It doesn't really cause anyone any problems. Our actions do have consequences, and there is a difference between behaving skillfully and unskillfully. So every action has a consequence beyond its immediate result. So again, we may feel that once we've done something and it's had its immediate impact, that's it, it's over and done with, finished. But the Buddha could see that things weren't like that. They didn't work like that. The ripples spread out, as it were, and the consequences go on unfolding far beyond what we may immediately see. When we do something, we just think, oh, well, I've said that, done, finished, move on. But the consequences continue to ripple out, and some of those will come back to us, of course, because we're not separate from the consequences of the actions that we set in place. So that moves us on to the 3rd aspect here, which is that we are responsible for all of our actions and their consequences. So yeah, we can't just duck that responsibility. We can't blame someone else, or we can't say, well, it's your fault. you shouldn't have allowed yourself to get so upset about what I said, kind of thing. It's your fault if you're hurt by what I said when we've said or done something hurtful. We have a responsibility. Of course, the other party has a responsibility as well for their reaction, but we have a responsibility for the effect that we have. And we have to carry that. Even if we deny that responsibility, we still bear the consequences. And it's through understanding that and realizing that we can start to perhaps change our behaviors, which leads us nicely into the fourth aspect here, which is that we can transform ourselves. So again, all this ties karma, tightly into this principle of conditionality, and that conditionality, of course, leads on to impermanence, brings in this idea of impermanence, that nothing stays the same, everything changes. And of course, through impermanence, well, we can change ourselves. Of course, if things didn't change, if things were fixed and immutable throughout time, then we could never change. We simply are what we are, and we have to live with it. But I guess, if we've been practicing even for a short while, we'll have begun to notice that we can bring about change in our lives, change in our experience through what we do, through the choices we make. Okay, thanks, Ed. You can take that one down. So every time we make a choice to do one thing or another, and not big choices necessarily, not just the big choices, not just the major decisions, but the small everyday choices, as simply as the choice of do we smile and say good morning to our neighbour, or because they were playing music last night, do we scowl and growl at them as we walk past, or do we just blank them completely and pretend they don't exist? The little everyday actions that we're caught up in all the time. All of these actions have a consequence. They all ripple out into the world and have an effect. I remember when I used to work in the evolution shop and being on the till serving customers, just how much difference a kind word would make either way. And it wasn't a big thing, just a smile and a good morning would often be enough, just acknowledging the presence of another being. And I also remember how uncomfortable it was when the customer just treated you as though you were almost like an auto till, that they just kind of waved their card and their product would get wrapped automatically and handed over to them by a totally unfeeling robotic person, and they could then walk out of the shop as if they'd never had a human interaction with you at all. Well, they hadn't, because you were being treated as an object, and how painful that was. Not that one was expecting gushing friendship from the people who came into the shop, but just simple acknowledgement of our being. So all of these little things have consequences, all of these little actions. And of course, a lot of the time, these actions are habitual. We don't necessarily think about them. It's just what we do. It's how we are. It's how we respond in certain situations, certain circumstances. And we may think that because they're habitual and because we've put no thought into them, they don't really matter, but they do matter. They're very, very significant. The Buddha told us that what we habitually think upon, that we become. So if we're habitually angry or unkind towards people, we become that angry, unkind person. It becomes our nature almost. Conversely, of course, if we make a habit of being kind and open and friendly towards people, even though it may be an effort at first for some of us, we become that person eventually. If we keep behaving in that way, we become that kind, warm, open, friendly person that other people enjoy being around. And we open up a whole new world to ourselves, a new world that we maybe hadn't experienced before. So it's important, all these little habitual things that we do, that we become as aware of them as we can, because they're all having an effect. they're all working away on the type of person that we are becoming all the time. So if you could have the next slide, Ed, please. So you may recognize these verses. If you're at all familiar with the Dhammapada, you will. That's the first two verses of the Dhammapada. So experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind, and so on. So our experience is determined by our state of mind. That's what these two verses of the Dhammapada are telling us. So if we behave from an impure mind, so if we behave on the basis of the three root defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion, then suffering will follow, dukkha. And again, it's for those of you who might have been there on Wednesday night, we were talking about dukkha. Yeah, not necessarily extreme painful physical suffering, but we're talking here about the kind of dissatisfaction that follows when things aren't quite how we'd like them to be. And of course, if we're behaving and acting in the world on the basis of this self-centered greed, hatred, and delusion, things are probably never really going to be how we want them to be, because all the people around us are behaving on the basis of how they want things to be, and that's bound to clash with how we want things to be, and that will cause us pain. If, on the other hand, we act out on the basis of love and of wisdom and of generosity, then the Dhammapada tells us happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So here we are, the Dhammapada is showing us that we in a way, we are creating, well, not in a way, we are creating the world that we live in, essentially by our mindset. How do we approach the world? How do we engage with the world? And that comes from how we think about the world and others and ourselves. And from that arises the experience that we have of the world. And this is all karma. This is all karma. Karma being, as I said right back at the beginning, is an aspect of conditionality. When we think something, when we say something, when we do something, we are setting up conditions that will quite naturally unfold into particular consequences. We can't act in isolation. You know, we can't do something and think that it's going to not affect the world around us and ourselves. It simply has to, because of conditionality. You know, we're not islands. We're all interconnected. And our actions and our speech originate from the way we think. So the way we think finds its way out into the external world, and it has an effect. It sets up conditions that then unfold and bring into being something, whatever the consequence of that action. Going right back to the first verse we started with, you know, from the arising of this, that arises. So from our actions, which are based on our state of mind, something will arise, the consequence of those actions. Which can be good as well as not being so good. Of course, karma works in both the positive and the negative direction. So when we behave skillfully, we create for ourselves and for others around us a world of happiness, rather than a world of the suffering. If you can imagine the picture that is conjured up by that first verse of the Dhammapada, you can just sort of picture the ox labouring, pulling a heavy cart along a dusty, unmade, rutted road in the heat of the Indian summer. Yeah, it's a really sort of painful image of toil and of effort, and of really not perhaps getting very far. And this is, I think, you know, this is what's happening if we're behaving unskillfully. Okay, thanks, Ed. We can take that slide down. So Sangha said that karma is not something that we do. Karma is what we are. So karma is not something that we do, it's what we are. So through our actions, we are creating ourselves. And again, coming back to conditionality, coming back to impermanence, coming back to the fact that everything is a constant flux of change. The way we behave now is setting up the conditions for the type of person we will become at some point in the future. And that point in the future could be 5 minutes from now, it could be later this afternoon, it could be tomorrow, it could be the next lifetime. We don't know. We simply don't know when the consequences, all of the consequences of those actions that we take are going to finally unravel and come into fruition. We can't tell that. All we know for sure is that there will be consequences to all our actions. And that's the simple principle of conditionality. And because of the fact that all of our actions spring from basically from our mind, from our mental states, we come to the conclusion that it's the intention behind the action that is the prime mover in karma and its consequences. It's not necessarily the action itself, but it's the intention behind it. We can do what seem to be on the surface good things, but if our intention is not good, if our intention is self-serving, then some of the karmic consequence from those actions will still be negative. For example, we may give to charity, we may donate cash or things or whatever, which is a good thing to do. But if our motivation is simply to make ourselves look good in the eyes of others, then there will be a negative karmic consequence for us, almost certainly on that. Although some people will benefit from what we've given, we ourselves will become even more self-centered, more self-serving. Our mental attitude will be on a downward spiral rather than an ascending spiral, simply because we're doing something for the wrong reasons. We're doing it in that case for negative reasons based in delusion, in greed, and in hate. So the important thing is to bear in mind, what are our intentions? Of course, there are some actions where one could envisage that there couldn't possibly be a good intention behind it, and the action itself then is sort of wholly unskillful. But I think we need to just be careful not to be too black and white in judging our actions, and we're certainly not in judging other people's actions. Maybe not judging other people's actions at all, actually. So there is another common misunderstanding of karma, which is that everything that happens to us is a result of our karma. So going back to the 5 different layers or levels of conditionality, of course, we can see that not everything that happens comes from the karmic level of conditionality. There are other levels of conditionality at work. So, for example, if someone suffers a misfortune, there's no justification for us saying, oh, well, they deserve it, it's their karma. They must have been really bad at some point in the past for that to happen to them. As I say, there are other levels of conditionality at work. And it's certainly not helpful to go around judging people on the basis of what's happening to them and saying, oh, they must have been good or they must have been bad in the past because look what's happening. And likewise for ourselves, although it may be fairly harmless if we apply that to ourselves, of course, when we start applying it to other people, it can become quite a harmful thing to do because it can lead into an attitude of judging and blaming, which is neither skillful nor helpful. So not everything that happens to us now is a result of our past karma, but every action that we do now will have a consequence in the future. Okay, so although we can't say that everything that is happening to us now is a consequence of our previous actions, we can say that all of our actions will have consequences in the future. When that future is, of course, I mean, as I say, it may be 5 minutes from now. If I angrily hang up the phone on someone now, there will be a consequence in the future. That might be in 2 minutes' time when they phone me back to tell me off for hanging up on them, or it might be a couple of days' time when I bump into them in the street, not realizing they were going to be there. Otherwise, I could have avoided them, and I then have to face the consequences of having hung up on them. It may be an unfolding consequence throughout the rest of my life because they decide they're going to have nothing more to do with me, and that will have an effect on the direction my life and their life takes. So it's kind of what we might like to call a sliding doors moment, isn't it, for those of you who've seen the film? One simple action can turn the whole course of our lives, and it's not necessarily a big action. In the film, it's just a case of whether you manage to catch the tube or you just miss catching the tube. And this poor woman's, well, say poor woman, in one instance, her life unfolded very nicely, but the alternative wasn't so good. But yeah, it's we just can't tell what all of the consequences of our actions are going to be. We can't foresee how things are going to unfold as time goes forward from what we're doing now. It may be fairly obvious what the immediate outcome is going to be, but the immediate outcome isn't the end of the story. So it continues to unfold. And just very briefly, I'm going to bring in rebirth into this because you can't talk about karma without talking about rebirth. So the Buddha quite clearly taught rebirth as in a sequence of lives, that this life is just one in a sequence of many. But in a way, for some of us, some people in the West in particular, rebirth is a bit of a tricky topic when addressed in that way. And all I can say is that, and again, I'll echo what Sangha said as I understand it here, is that to be a practicing Buddhist, it's not necessary to accept rebirth as a fact, but it probably is necessary to keep an open mind on it. And I think that's probably the best thing we can do. I can't prove rebirth to you, and I challenge anyone who says they can. Some people may have experiences of previous lives, but unfortunately, I don't think that is proof to other people that rebirth exists. That's only proof to them. So I can't prove to you that rebirth exists. All I can urge is that one keeps an open mind on it and doesn't become closed down. Because whatever you think happens after we die is just a view. None of us know. None of us. Doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are, if any. Doesn't matter what your scientific understanding is. There isn't a single person existing on this planet right now who knows categorically what happens to us after we die. And that goes for Buddhists as well. Okay, we don't know. We may have our beliefs, we may have what we accept, what seems logical and sensible to us, but we don't know. So this is why I think we have to keep an open mind on it. Short of enlightenment, we won't know. Whatever view we have is to some extent going to be a wrong view. But where we can experience a form of rebirth, if you like, or might call it rebecoming, is in every single moment of our time here now. We are constantly rebecoming through what we do. We are changing ourselves all the time. Or we may just be trying to maintain ourselves exactly as we are by doing everything habitually. That takes an awful lot of effort and is not very productive. But even there, we're trying to, as it were, buck the trend of the flow of conditionality, which is changing things. So we are becoming something new every moment. we'll all leave this meeting in half an hour or so's time a different person in some ways, in many ways, to the person that came to this meeting. Our state of mind will maybe have changed. We may be more settled, more positive after the meditation. We may be feeling more metta, more loving kindness. We may have a little bit more of an understanding of the effects of our actions after this talk on karma and our discussion that's to follow. Hopefully all those positive changes will have occurred and we'll leave here slightly better people than the person who came here at 10:30. Maybe it won't, but we will have changed, even if not in a positive way. Then, of course, the opposite may have happened. You may find that you're strongly disagreeing with everything I'm saying, and that's irritating you and making you angry. So again, you'll leave a slightly different person. I hope that's not the case, but it could be happening. So we are re-becoming all the time. The principles of conditionality and impermanence show us that. And just have a look at my last slide, which just kind of brings all this together. So I tried to be a bit creative. My slides generally tend to be lists and can be a bit boring, I know. So here's a little cloud for you. And the cloud is you, me, all of us. We're about as fixed and as enduring as a cloud. If you've ever really watched a cloud, you'll notice that they're constantly changing shape. Clouds don't stay the same for one moment as they expand in one area and disappear in another area. And in a way, that's a good image of us, I think. We are constantly changing, and we're about as ephemeral as a cloud anyway. But caught up in that cloud, of course, are all these principles of conditionality, impermanence, karma, and rebecoming. And just like the cloud constantly becoming something slightly different through our actions, which are governed by conditionality and impermanence, we're becoming slightly different all the time as well. I've horrendously overrun, and I apologize for that. So I'm just going to finish. As I'm over time, I might as well continue going over time and read again Vishvapani's bit on karma, and then we'll go into our groups. Everywhere I look in the universe, I see things arising and passing away in dependence upon conditions. From galaxies and stars to microorganisms, this pattern holds true. Things aren't random, they have causes and effects. This is also true of my life. What I am today is the product of many influences: my family, culture, education, and relationships. It's also the product of choices I've made, of how I've acted, of my mental states and habits. There are many things I cannot alter, and these I must accept. But I can change those conditions that spring from my mind. I can change how I think. I can affect how I feel. Meditation and Dharma practice give me ways to do so. I know that skillful actions have brought me happiness and fulfillment and have benefited others. When I've been kind or generous, I've seen the others benefit, and it has given me happiness. I know that my unskillful actions have harmed others and harmed me too. When I've been unkind, I've seen the pain I have caused. Those actions have reinforced negative states of mind that make me unhappy, and I have felt remorse and regret. Therefore, I should cultivate positive states, practice skillful actions, and avoid unskillful ones. This means practicing the Dharma, which offers a sure path to establishing positive conditions. To this path, I commit myself.